Hello everyone, it's your favorite shit on space here, and when I like to keep my eye on random ttrpgs I see coming out on Kickstarter or on Drive-Thru RPG because, well, I just like to and it's fun inspiration work. And one I saw on YouTube trailers that caught my attention was this ttrpg called Biophage, which I really hope I'm saying right, by Studio Hex. And honestly, I thought it was a bit of an interesting premise, so I kind of want to talk about it and give it a little bit of a shout out, because I thought that would sound fun and something fun to do. Also, Coco's really into the Prototype franchise, and she would kill me if I didn't take this opportunity, so let's get on with it. Now, I'm collecting information for this video from both the YouTube videos presented and the Kickstarter page that hasn't technically started yet, but kind of has. And just to be clear with that, I do not have some kind of insider information. I am not with Studio Hex. This is all just me talking about stuff I want to talk about. So, starting off with the first bit, what's the setting? Well, the setting is set in a near-future world, kind of dystopia thing, where for most of human history, society has been secretly guided by a group that, for lack of a, I think they're called the Elites, but I forgot the name, but for the sake of a thing, they're the Illuminati. They're a secret society. They try to guide the world to some unknowable ends and keep themselves in power. However, recently they kind of messed up. Someone released a massive plague, and that was not part of the schedule. Anyway, they had to step in and take a little bit more direct control. Not entirely out in the open, but, you know, more than you'd probably want. As part of their attempts to either fix the issue or as a side effect, they began experimenting with people, and that created parasites. Now, and of course that's what you play in the game. Getting back to the gameplay and what your character is doing, your character is not actually just one player, but rather two players. One player plays the host. This is, for lack of a better term, the human half. The guy or girl that you were or whatever, before you were, well, turned into this. They have a life, past, history, and all that. The other one plays the parasite, the supernatural creature, well, not supernatural, or maybe supernatural, biological monstrosity that's attached yourself permanently to that human, and now the two of you are kind of stuck in it together, no matter how much you wish you weren't. And generally speaking, hosts are not the most weak-willed of people due to having to survive the process, which does not have a high success rate at all. So, you know, good for you, I guess. Now, how the game works is that your characters it runs on a bit of a weird 2d6 system, but not in the way you think. You see, to roll a test, you simply roll 1d6 to see if you succeed the test. So it's like a simple test might be anything between 2 to 6 would win, while a really hard task would be only a 5 or 6 would win. You pass, you get the idea. And basically, that's it. You have stats that apply to different categories of things, but they also basically just count for, basically just like a pool you can use to re-roll things. It's very simple. But the second D6 comes in where if it lands at certain sides, there'll be an and or but statement to it, which I guess is trying to replicate a missed success thing, which we can go into at a later point here. Your characters also have special abilities, often in the form of traits or mutations, which are kind of self-explanatory. Traits that your character can have are like more mundane things to help them out, while mutations are, well, part of your not supernatural, but monstrous ability set, you could say. Now, most of your monstrous abilities, of course, rely on you spending the game's arbitrary points, and to do that, you basically have to consume living matter. I've heard at points say explicitly human, but then other points seem to act like any living matter will do, but humans you're connected with are better for it. So, however I might have read part of that wrong, maybe it isn't, although personally I would hope it's the latter, but that's a different discussion we'll get back into. But where this game gets really interesting is how the two dynamics of your characters work. Your characters, of course, one person plays the parasite, the other one plays the host, and they have to work together. Now, at some points, one is in control completely, so they can just do what they want, mostly with impunity. But this is not entirely true, as the other one can always try to force a roll or force an action upon the other one, creating a bit of an interesting dynamic. There is a state called balance where both sides have to work together or agree on everything, and this can let them use their true or monstrous form, which is, of course, very powerful, not great at staying hidden usually, but is incredibly powerful. But in this state, you burn your hunger points extremely fast, but you also have to resist. We all have to agree on every single action. You can't, disagree. So it's a rather complicated process there. So overall, there's quite a little bit to the game I find quite interesting. as I personally think. Combat is extremely simple. The GM doesn't really roll anything. And overall, it's a very simple game. It's not a complex style of game. You also have bonds or links, I can't remember which one they're called now. But basically, it's a people your usually host is connected to. Something else you want to remember is that both your host and parasite player has goals and missions they want to achieve. If you're familiar with some of the later World of Darkness games or Story Pass things, you kind of get the gist of it. You have short-term goals that are easy to complete, long-term goals that are harder, and shared goals that both the host and the parasite want to complete. And you're supposed to, each character to have a disposition of what they think towards their other half. So overall, a very simple but kind of interesting game system, and I would like to, and most of that was me trying to be overviewing and objective, and now I want to switch into more my personal thoughts, if you will. Now, to my personal opinions on the matter of the game, one thing I want to clear up is that you may be slightly under a different impression with this game that's going to be a very action-packed, kind of like, horror action adventure where you use your cool powers and fight tons of bad guys and blow things up, and it's going to be awesome. This is not that kind of game. Not only is combat not enough of a focus in a very traditional sense to really appeal to that, the very themey and nature of the game is not really around playing that kind of action-adventure character, if that makes sense. Going back to the prototype reference, you're not going to be Alex Mercer. You're not going to be going around throwing tanks around, even if maybe you could mechanically, but you won't be doing that thematically. So, thematically, it's a much more down-to-earth, creepy kind of trying to stay hidden kind of, at least that's the impression I got from the rules and text. If that is not what they're going for, then I may have been misinterpreting things. But I do believe I am correct on that assessment. To the mechanics and dice themselves, I like some aspects of it, but I'm gonna admit, I like my systems a little bit more on the gamey simulation side, and this is very heavily on the narrative and simplified side than I like to play my games. So in some ways, I'm not super convinced I can judge this rule set properly. It's clearly going for a different audience of game than I like to play. I do have a slight fear that the very limited dice mechanics could be difficult to allow a range of powers or truly leveling up characters over time, but we don't really have the rules for character growth in that sense yet, so maybe I'm just speaking for nothing. So, address that when the game fully comes out. And circling back to me talking about, do the characters need to eat humans or not to survive, this comes back to another thing, that no matter how much way you're not going to play a hero. And I do say that sounds weird to say because I talk about a lot of World of Darkness games, but even within World of Darkness, almost every single line could very easily be played as a hero going on adventures to save the people they care about or perhaps the world. Some World of Darkness games, I'm going to use a comparison, lean into that a lot more, while some try to stay away from it. But there is a general assumption that almost any of them could go into superheroes with furs and fang mode. And this isn't really a flaw, just nature. You, as far as I can tell, can't really do that with Biophage. It's truly not really set up for you to play this heroic kind of character. Maybe. The pre-made adventure kind of it kind of lets your character play like someone who's protecting this little kid, which at least leans into a very personal, intimate kind of heroism. But the scenario also suggests the idea of the player characters just handing over the kid to the bad guys or consuming her for energy, which says a lot about the characters. And I must also stress there's no humanity system in this game. There's not a humanity stat you're rolling on or resisting. Control is kind of a stat, but heavily simplified. It only has 3 steps from what I could tell, importantly. And another thing I want to say is, and this is something that no one to my knowledge has talked about, but it's that fundamentally it's a cool concept, one player playing the host, one playing Parasite, but that can go very badly and be very difficult to run. Because while a lot of the game of Biophage is clearly trying to be simplistic and easy to get into, it's crossing into a trap that another World of Darkness game already had, Wraith the Oblivion. If you know anything about Wraith the Oblivion, it was designed from the ground up to be a very difficult game to play. Not just for difficulty's sake, but to try to truly be a experienced kind of RPG. That you had to be an experienced ttrpg fan to really be able to play and run effectively. Whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's up to anyone's debate, of course. But it did succeed that. And one of the things that has been very difficult for many people to wrap their head around is the whole player playing the Shadow versus the Wraith kind of thing. Now, the Shadow versus the Ghost kind of thing, which, to be fair, the difference is in that Wraith the Oblivion, the Shadow, is very much antagonistic to the human by default, while in Biophage, the host and parasite aren't strictly antagonistic and do have to have some goals, even if it's just survival. But I do want to stress that this is not entirely new territory that some people have been acting like it is, and more importantly, it's a very pitfall that can cause massive issues. I would actually personally recommend that if you want to run this game as a quick start or when the game comes out, especially if they don't really address that in the full rulebook, I would recommend you actually pick up a copy of Wraith the Oblivion and go to the section about the Shadow Guide and how to play that, because I think that will be actually very helpful, especially because it adds some depth to it, because a lot of Biophage is kind of surface level in all ways, and that could just be because it's just Kickstarter material we have, but it's very much focused on the aesthetics of it and doesn't really get into the meat and potatoes of it so much. And especially if that doesn't change, I would totally recommend looking at some Wraith for some inspiration on how to do it, not better, but certainly interesting. You could also, along the way, pick up some Deviant to maybe get some ideas of how to run it, but I'm not sure. And one last thing I want to focus on is the cleaners. We don't really know much about them other than they use cybernetics, try to keep sanity, and generally fight the biophages. I'm going to be completely honest here, I might just have more fun playing the cleaners or running games about them, because there's just something very appealing I like about playing people with cybernetics battling genetic monsters. This is totally my personal view. If you do not like me for that or think I'm stupid, I could be wrong. But I do find it interesting that the developers are going out of their way to establish that the cleaners will be a playable faction. I'm curious if we're going to see some moral quandaries between the two. Is this a debate between who is right, who is wrong? Do they have internal factions? That kind of, I'm curious to see how that plays out. Also, that's going to be interesting because the main appeal of the game of Biophage to many people is playing two players in one body, but presumably the cleaners don't have that mechanic, at least, or in a very different way. So I'm curious how they'll play it. But overall, those are just my opinions and my overview of the Biophage ttrpg and what's coming out. If you want to look at this more yourself, go look at the channel or the Kickstart, or get the free Kickstart you can get to kind of get a feel for the game. It has some characters and is enough to play around for a little bit. So overall, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you all next time.